Welcome to Vintage Voices, the exclusive space where wisdom is timeless and the golden years are just the start of bold new adventures. Each week, we uncover the treasure trove of tales kept tucked away, the echoes of history witnessed, and the tears that were a part of their journeys. These narratives are far too precious to be left untold, so lend us your ears as we delve into the uncharted memoirs of those who've lived a lifetime of love, lessons, and legacy. Vintage Voices, where every wrinkle is a tale waiting to be told. This podcast is a heartfelt partnership between the Canon Studios Podcast Network and Senior Planners.
What did you do for a living, Miss Marianne?
Well, I was in accounting my whole life, but I love children and babies, and I love the handicap. So when our son got out of college, I told Gunther, and I've been doing work with the handicap at night, and he said, well, I think you can give your job up and do what you want to do. And I went to work for the handicap in a workshop where we just put steel together, and they got paid by the piece. And then when we moved away from there, we moved up to LJ to retire. And
Where was this?
this was in Atlanta, outside of Atlanta. And then we moved to LJ, and I always wanted to be a teacher, and I went to work at a Baptist preschool and worked there for 8 years, part-time, and I loved it. But I love working with the handicap and with children.
And what about you, Mr. Gunther?
Well, of course, I was born in Germany. I finished my education. I was 20 when I came over. I made my citizenship in 65. And I worked, when I came over, or what I studied in Germany was store construction and design. So that was in December 61. I was drafted and went to basic training. After basic training, I went to Alabama to the Army Aviation Rotary Wing Division, and I was working in publication because my MOS became graphic artist, which was part of what my education was in Germany too. And from there, I went to Germany for a year at the 7th Army NCO Academy. Again, with my language, MOS was German, and there were a lot of German civilians working at the base. And then I left Germany. So my last weekend in Germany was when Kennedy was assassinated in 63. So then I came back, went back to Montgomery Ward. And from Montgomery Ward, I went to a smaller company in retail, again in store design and construction.
Still in Chicago?
In Chicago. Then that company was bought out by Zale Corporation, Zale Jewelers. We were in the shoe business. So Zale, at that time, owned a company in Atlanta. And when they closed our office in Chicago, I came to Atlanta. So same things, store design. And then I built a building for them. We were displaced. We were displaced by the DOT. We were down on Brookwood in Atlanta, and when they expanded 85, we were displaced, and we went to Marietta, and I was put in charge of building the building and the distribution center. At that time, the company had about 1,000 stores from coast to coast, including Puerto Rico, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a big job, first of all, to do the building. I was the go-between the architects and the interior designers and all that sort of stuff. So I had my own office with a secretary. And the office building was a 3-story office building, was 380 some employees. Unfortunately, Zale sold us to another company, and after several years, they didn't like the profits they were realizing from the company. They sold us again. It didn't take long that the company went downhill, and I was released in 90. The first layoff we had was a layoff as about 100 employees. They came in Monday morning, had their packets on their desk, and their boxes sitting at their office, and it said, "You got till 10 o'clock to gather your things, and out you go the front door." I was not one of those. I was.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, I was.
Pack your bags and go.
I was maybe in the 6th layoff. Then it went, much smaller because there weren't too many people left,
Yeah.
in the company. So I was laid off in 90. Was out of work for about 10 months. Went with another company, smaller company in the chemical business as a director of purchasing. So, and that's basically it. I retired from there.
Wonderful. When did you retire?
21.
So, y'all came here, you retired, both of you retired, you kept the babies. Then y'all moved to LJ, or were you already in LJ?
No, we lived in Marietta, and then we moved to LJ and stayed
We had
up
a house for
28 years altogether.
We built it in 90 as a tax bracket. And so we didn't move up there till 2001. We went back to Germany on it. I took her several times to, especially when the wall came down, when the communists fell. I took her to East Germany, where my grandparents came from, where my mother was born. And we inherited the property of my grandfather's, which was under Russian regime or communist, management. But the house was fallen in. But at that time, we could reclaim the property, which we did. Even though it was fallen in and devastated. But. So we got a little money out of that, not much. So when we came back, we said, well, we'll share that money with the children. And they got their share.
We didn't get a share.
Yeah, we kept the share. We divided by 3. And they
get what we have, don't
they immediately turned around and bought a house. Each of them, a starter, a small starter house. And it went on from there.
I bet you've seen a lot in Germany.
Well, I was stationed, like I said, I was stationed down in Bavaria. My parents were still living. They were living in Kiel, which is the northern part. So, but Dad came down to visit me down in Bad Tölz in Bavaria. And then my ex-girlfriend, when I was still living in Germany, she came down, and we got back together, and I got married while I was in the service, with her. And eventually I brought her back to Chicago. So that's where the children were born.
Where in Chicago? I used to have a house on the Gold Coast, on Russ Street.
Well, we were we settled down in the German neighborhood, which was Western and Lincolnwood, and Rogers Park, and then we bought a house in Rogers Park too. But then a couple of years later, I was transferred. So how things go.
I know I had an assistant that was from Germany. I don't even remember where she's from. She is 82 years old. And when everything started happening with the government around here about 4 or 5 years ago, she started really, really getting nervous and anxious and kept saying, I feel like it's going to go the same direction it was in Germany. Yeah.
See, he watches all that stuff on TV, the killing and everything, and I can't watch it. And I asked him why he watches it, and he said, because that was my life. That's how it was with the children saying, you want a lollipop, come with me, and that's what he grew up in.
Can you elaborate on that?
I was born in 1938, and of course, we were bombed. We've seen all this, and there's a story I put in these in the, and she might give it to you, where we played as children. We played in the rubble. That's what we had to play with, And there was this incident. We out of the bricks, which were laying around, we made houses. We made houses and with levels, and we used the wood chips and whatever to and then we furnished those little buildings, and we set them afire, and that was. So then one day we found this can of shoe polish. Well, it became a table, in the little building, like a dollhouse, basically, but just made out of remnants from the bombing or from where the building fell in. So then we set this thing on fire. Well, we were maybe 10 years old or something like that, not realizing that the wax in the can would expand or heat up, so it exploded in our faces.
And the shoe polish?
Mm-hmm. And I wasn't burned, but one of my friends, we were kids, doing this. Rats running around at night. I still remember unexploded bombs, especially the phosphor bombs that looked like a stick like that, laying around in the backyards and things like that, So it's going, of course, in the bomb shelter, which in general were under the apartment buildings, sleeping there overnight. They had bunk beds in there for the kids, sleeping on straw mattresses. And, those things you won't forget, even while I was 5, 6, 7 years old, So it's...
This is why I'm making him.
That's all we knew. That's all was there. We were hungry, too. And Dad was taken prisoner of war, and my father, in the last 6 months of the war, and he was just drafted 6 months before. So he was taken prisoner of war in France by Americans. So he came back in 1947 while we were living in the East with my grandfather, because the bombings, some of these cities, especially Cologne, where I was born, was a major target for the Western, coming in, and so we moved away, and then we moved back to Cologne in 1947 when my dad came back. But
at least he was released.
He was released. He was not. He was treated well because he knew the language. He knew American. They lived in the States. In fact, my parents met in the United States and then worked for a German company, moved back to Germany because the company transferred them back basically. So then, any which way, yes, we were hungry. Dad had a job with my godfather, and they went to American installations and taking pictures and things like that. On the way back, of course, they stopped on the black market at farmers and things like that, wherever they were, and brought back some beans or brought back a ham, smoked ham, or something like that. The black market was flourishing, but there are times where even in the East, there were times where we went out in the fields to dig up potatoes, which the plow left in the ground. We went back to the fields to pick up grains which had fallen on the ground and thrashed them at home and made bread and things like that. You were desperate sometimes to, first of all, not waste anything. We dried our own fruit in the sunshine. We made our own yogurt by putting milk, if we had it, put the milk in the window and let it curd or sour. That was our yogurt. So we survived it, but there were times where it was rough.
Well, now I see why you're writing a memoir.
I've wanted him to do it forever, for 43 years, and finally he started doing it.
Is it hard to go back and relive some of those things?
Well, it's in your mind. You won't forget these pictures, especially with what you see now or what you see in Ukraine. That's exactly how it was. Streets and rubble on the streets, and rats running around, and that's just how it was. Sad.
It's insane to think these kids nowadays, if they don't have
They've never realized that unless see, and I was drafted, and the draft, there's no more draft. So these kids today, unless they want to, get into the service and see some of that stuff, it's pretty bad. At the same time, when the Russians, we were still in the East, where my dad was in prisoner of war, and the country was divided into 4 sectors: the Brits, the French, the Americans, and of course the Russians. So we were in the East where that became a Russian-occupied sector. So we watched as children, as 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. There was a curfew that Sunday, and kids so the troops were marching in, the Russian troops were marching in on the main street, and we were only a block away from the main street. So we kids went to the corner, even though the curfew was in place. And there was a nice Russian officer standing on the corner. He was nice. He let us stay. And we watched the troops march in, and they came in with horse and buggy, laying on hay.
This is around 48, 49?
This was 45.
Oh, 45, okay.
When the Allies divided the country into 4. So, that was right when this happened, 45, right after the war.
See, I want him to do a video. This is what I really wanted, but I finally got the memoirs. But I have wanted somebody to come to our house and he'd do this, because the children and grandchildren, nobody knows about this.
That would mean so much for them to sit and hear this story.
Yes. And that's what I really wanted done.
Mm-hmm.
But it's in writing, so it's in there. I've described a lot of the little details,
Mm-hmm. Wow.
It's sad. And, of course, one of the family members got killed. Even my mom's cousin, who was, he was maybe 18 or 16. He was sent to the Russian front by by the Germans, because at that time they drafted anybody. The old people. My dad was in the 40s already when he got drafted, and so they took anybody and anybody for cannon fodder, and the cousin never came back, and they don't know where he ended up in Russia.
And the people didn't go tell your family members back in the day? They just didn't come home?
Just didn't come home. Because, that was, the Russian situation became terrible because the winter hit. And that's where the German army really faltered and lost. I mean, not only, that talk about the Jews situation and all this sort of stuff, but Germany lost a lot of millions of people in the war.
So German was your number one language. When did you learn to speak English?
Well, German education, it's mandatory 6 years of English. And I'm not talking semesters, I'm talking full year. 2 hours every day. So you start learning the language by the A, apple, B, C, and then it goes on and on and on. You learn the spelling. So I had 6 years of English. So when I came to the States in, 59. I spoke the language. So even though the language we're taught in Germany was Oxford English, so a lot of words, certainly the cuss words, I learned on the street of Chicago. Michigan Avenue.
Yes.
My uncle, we were walking Michigan Avenue here, so here's this bum on Michigan Avenue, and he said, I would give an F for a sandwich or something. And I asked my uncle, what does that mean? So that's something we didn't learn. We did not learn. Yes. So anyway, try.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming and sitting with us today and sharing your story with us. It's maybe one of the best ones we've had.
It's going to continue. The story is going to continue, hopefully.
Say we were with a bunch of people once, and he was telling this story, kind of, and we all sat there. And when they got through, I said, "You know what thalidomide is?" And of course, it was all old people, and they knew what thalidomide was. I said, "I taught thalidomide babies how to swim," because his story is so magnificent compared to a regular story. Thalidomide was a drug people took when I was like 20, pregnant women, and it made the babies be born with flipper hands. They didn't, there was a little hand here, a little flipper, and they didn't have arms. And well, they didn't know that was the deformity coming from the medicine. It was called thalidomide, and pregnant women took it, and a lot of babies were born with these little flipper hands. And so I always say, after his magnificent stories, I taught thalidomide babies how to swim.
That's good too.
Yeah.
A lot of these stories have to do with your personality too. I met people in the service, young kids, that wanted to be good soldiers and couldn't hack it. To behave themselves in a foreign country, to uphold the reputation of America, or as a service person. So I made a lot of friends, and they're good people all over this place.
As the sun sets on another episode of Vintage Voices, we tuck away the stories shared today into the cherished album of our collective history. We send a heartfelt thank you to our remarkable guest from the Arbors at Bridge Mill for entrusting us with the fabric of their storied lives, and to you, our listeners, for joining this journey through time. Remember, each wrinkle holds a story, each story a lesson, and every lesson is a step towards legacy. Until next time, keep the conversations alive, honor the voices of our wisest companions, and may you find inspiration to weave your own tale into the rich tapestry of life. From all of us at Canon Studios Network, thank you for listening to Vintage Voices, where the past speaks and we listen. Goodbye for now, and may your days be storied and bright.